Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Star Trek New Worlds. That's right, that not exactly the newest of intros, but slight different flavor for the intro for you there. I'll be making some more intros or some new fresh intros for the live stream as we go forward, so be on the lookout for those. Hi, my name's Tony. Welcome to Star Trek New Worlds. If you are a first-time viewer here, thank you for taking the time and joining us either live, or if you're catching us on the replay, thank you for taking the time there as well. You're catching us either on YouTube, Twitch, or on Facebook. Either way you can find us and catch us. Thank you so much for joining us. If you are a first-time viewer, you're probably wondering, what in the world is this Star Trek New Worlds thing? Well, let me tell you, it is a 4X turn-based strategy game that we, a bunch of friends and I, play online with you based on the Amarillo Design Bureau's rule set for Federation and Empire. That's a game that we play using online, using a platform called Vassal to be able to, and that'll be the map that I'll show you here in a moment. And of course, we go back and forth over email and various things, allowing this strategy game to unfold, the narrative to evolve, and bring you along for the story and the intrigue and the conflict as we have it on these live streams here. If you're a returning viewer like the folks that are in the chat over here on my right, then thank you so much for joining us. We've got Jim, Paul, Daniel, Chuck, did I already say Chuck? And already the comments are exciting as we begin. But what is in today's episode? Well, today we're going to be doing a turn reveal for up to turn 20 for the Klingon Empire. We've got some problems with pirates that we will discuss. We, as per the thumbnail, are going to be discussing the Omicron Initiative, a little homage to real world affairs. And breaking news, we're at our max number of players. Well, not necessarily our max, but breaking news, just before I went live, I confirmed with the community that we are at 10 players. So 10 players is sort of the ideal number that we were looking for this iteration of the campaign. We're at 10. Thank you so much for joining us. For those new players who have come on board and are joining us in the campaign, thank you so much. It's going to be so much fun to play with you. As I mentioned before in a previous live stream, we had a total of 10 starting locations that we had sort of allocated in the map. And now that we have 10, all those starting spots are filled. So essentially, we're going to see how this story evolves as we go forward with 10 total players, starting from day one, going forward in this 4X exploration, exploiting, exterminating, and expanding game that we're sharing with you live. So thank you for joining us here today. Why don't I get into the turn reveal right away? Let's start with where I left you off in our last live stream, and that would be here in turn 10. So this is actually our turn 11 map. 10 has been completed. The map comes back to me, and I submit for turn 11. So as you can see here, this is sort of a recap of where we were before we got started. And as you can see here, we've got two sort of two non-player races that I've encountered. One is the Lyrans, which are the sort of cat people, and those are the folks that are in the yellow and green. And then we've got the Carnivon, which are like the dog people, like werewolves, essentially. And those are the green and yellow. The color combinations are always exciting. And as you can see here, we've got the Lyrans and the Carnivon. So in this early part of the game, let me just show you what we're going on. As per our normal routine of going around the bases, you can see here that the Klingon Empire is at a total of 16 EP in this particular iteration. So you can see at turn 10, we were at 16 EP. Not exactly the greatest considering we started off at 14, but it is what it is. The Carnivon and the Lyrans, you can see here, they're just basically at 1 EP apiece. And why is that? Well, if we take away the ships and the bases, you will see that both of these planets are essentially colonies. So how that works in this game is, as we start off, we are very, the very first turns, you're very weak, you're very sort of underdeveloped. And so the encounters that you have throughout the game will scale with your level of the resources that you have. So if you're very small, the NPC or the non-player races that you'll encounter will scale with you. Think of it like we're all growing together and we just happen to bump each other at that early stage of the game. So here we have 2 colonies, so they're 1 EP apiece, and they're showing up on the map like this. So let's bring those ships and bases back, and let's go to fleet cap. So fleet cap again is the count of total defense factors in the, well, you can see both defense and attack factors here, but as we look down the list, you will see that, I'll put it right next to my face here, so you can see that the Carnivon have a total of 7 fleet cap. They have a 3 attack, 7 defense total. The Klingons have a 1735 respectively with a fleet cap of 36, and the Lyrans are a 4-8 split with a total fleet cap of 10. If we sort of dig in here, you can see that up here, Fire Squadron fleet has a total of SE. Those are ship equivalents, so it has a total of 4 SEs, or 4 ships in that fleet, with a total attack factor of 4, total defense factor of 8. So you can see that there. That's the map. That's not too much to talk about here in this particular turn. This is where we were last live stream. So in the spirit of moving along, let's go to the next turn iteration that I got back. Bang. So you can see here that a couple of things have changed. One, let's just take a quick look at where we are in the world. Charlie 22, that is the location of the home world, as you can see it here on the map. You will notice that there's a couple things that are different. Let's take away the ships and the bases. You will notice that those 2 colonies that were previously Lyran and Carnivon are now no longer. They are part of the Klingon Empire. Well, I mean, you could probably tell by the little, what is it, mouse right here under my eye, we got into a fight. That's right, the Lyrans and the Carnivons, we decided to say, you know what, let's test that Klingon military, and bang, we attacked them both, one after another. And as a result, we were able to take those two colonies, and that's where we're at now. One of the consequences of taking a planet like this is that, one, happiness, obviously, when you devastate and sort of dominate a planet, they hate you. Hence the -H here that you can see here. In this game, we have a range of planetary attitudes. That's a scale of planetary attitude. Very unhappy is the H-, or we'll call it hostile. And then it goes up in increments. So there's basically a total of 5 increments, 2 up, 2 down, and then in the middle. And so you can see here it's hostile, then it would go to unfriendly, then it would go to indifferent, then it would go to friendly, and then it would go to happy. So as you can see here, we're at the extreme of the unhappiness scale for both of these. Now, in this game, or in this iteration with colonies, there is no economic impact for a colony being extremely unhappy. However, when we go up to other planets, bigger planets, developing planets, minor planets, and so on, there is an economic impact depending on the scenario. So we'll see how that evolves as we go forward in the map. But let's bring back the bases and the ships. So you can see here, not a lot has changed. We've got a couple ships, these exploration ships. So the D3E is an early era or a W era ship. And the E is the survey cruiser or the exploration cruiser that we have. So you can see that we're using that to be able to explore around the area. One specific note in this iteration of the game, whereas it was not in previous iterations that we've played, colonies are supply points. So what does that mean? Let me show you. On the supply menu here, I will set the Klingon supply. And let's set the supply to 2. Sure. Let's say our default supply is 2. So what that does is, you can see here on the map, is now, because the Klingon colors are not very dynamic, it's gray, but you can see at least a little bit of the outline of where the supply extends to. In previous games, colonies didn't provide supply, so you'd have to put a base there to be able to provide supply beyond the colony. But in this iteration of the game, the big difference between a colony and a resource just being like a mining station that harvests mineral resources, the colony actually provides supply. So here you can see that in the area that is sort of grayed out, that is, if my supply is 2 hexes, that is the range of the supply that I can reach with those ships. Why is that important? Because you can only explore, successfully explore that is, hexes that you have supply to. So with the exploration ships that we've got out and about here, you can see that the ships can only really successfully explore the gray hexes that have that lighter hue to it. That's the range of supply. I should note one minor mistake on this map. You'll notice in the bottom right of the sort of discovered area, there's this YFEL. That's just a typo, if we'll call it that. That had been lost earlier in previous turns. It just didn't get removed from the map. Purely a typo. So no harm, no foul. So that's where the map is looking there. Now let's go to the final turn that I will be revealing for you today. Bam! Ooh! Now you'll notice that our location has changed again. We are our homeworld is now in Charlie 09. And you will see that this is what we were talking about rolling into our next subject of conversation, problems with pirates. So again, let's just take a look around. Let's take a quick look at the EP. You will see that the Klingon economy is 65. So that's not an accurate number. That number is right. So normally that would be 6.5. And that's not an accurate number for EP. I'm not sure what's going on there. It would seem as though, right, it would seem that there's a couple of numbers in the Klingon homeworld or the Klingon home system that are not being represented properly there. But if we look down that list, we have the Klingon homeworld, which is normally a 10. You can see that it's a 12 EP at this point. The Klingon minor planet is a 3 EP. That's normal. So it would normally be represented on this as 30. So 120 and 30, that would be 15 EP. You can see that there's another Klingon planet that's in our home system that has 30 EP. So that would be 3 EP. So 3, 3, and the 12 would give us a total of 18. And then the resources that you can see there, there's 2. So that would be a total of 20 EP. Should be a total of 20 EP. But like I say, the numbers are just not being represented there quite accurately. Always important in this game to be able to trust that everything works, but then just to make sure, trust and verify. So what's the big thing that's going on here? Let's take away the ships and we can see what's going on behind. You can see that we've got this slight base distribution going on here. Fundamentally, you can see that the 2 colonies that were conquered before, we've put bases on them. And then, of course, just with the way the explorations worked out as far as like, it's a random roll generator that allows you to understand whether you've explored successfully or not successfully a hex. And as you can see, the sort of natural evolution of the exploration has been going in a sort of northerly direction. So you can see that we're now 2 bases out from the homeworld in this distribution. And most importantly, we've come across these 2 Orion pirates. Now, what does that mean? Now, normally, when you encounter Orion pirates, there's a couple of ways you could go with that. You could either choose to attack them right away, because after all, pirates and piracy in your sort of normal trade network and economy, not so great. Pirates can certainly cause issues, disrupt your income, and various other issues like that. However, in this particular game, or at least in this particular duration, you can certainly reach out and sort of talk to them, decide to trade with them, and do things like that. So as opposed to, as you saw in the early stages of the game, we had this sort of aggressive, hostile response to the Lyrans and the Carnivons, respectively. That didn't occur, or sorry, rather, we did that and took those colonies. But when it comes to the pirates, as opposed to going straight to war, we're taking a more conversationalist approach and seeing what kind of opportunities may be there with regards to the Orion pirates. The big thing right now, especially at the early stage of the game, it's all about the money. So how can we interact with the pirates to generate funds? Normally, trade is the biggest one, in the sense that you can send a commercial convoy to them and they can send one back. The only challenge with that is that in order for a convoy to successfully go back and forth, there's 2 things. One, range. There's got to be enough of a distance. And you want to think about it from this way. If you're too close to somebody, there's not too much you can trade with them that they haven't seen before. Exotic goods, new items, things like that. So if they're too close to you, there's not a lot of value in that trade. But if they're far enough away, then there's unique items or cultural trinkets or various other things that you can come across that would be of value, unique value anyway, to a potential trader on the other side. So 4 hexes is the magical number here. If you're 4 hexes away from a station, then you're good to go. Now you'll notice here that the homeworld is 1, 2, 3, 4 hexes away from the space station in Foxtrot 6. So that's a really good option to be able to trade with them. However, there's the second criteria. You need to have a Y-dock, meaning at this early stage of the game, there are 2 base stations that you can build. You can build the early era base station, or the Y era BS base station, or you can build the early era Y era dock, or space dock, YDK. So the YDK is what you need to be able to do trade missions back and forth. The only exception to that rule is you can generate a convoy from your homeworld. Because obviously it's a homeworld, you've got lots of resources there, so there's no issue. The requirement for the dock is, because the dock is the early era space station, it becomes like a DS9, like a hub of cultural and trade exchange. So it needs to be big enough to be able to facilitate that, and sort of the Y dock is the minimum requirement for that. So in the interest of the Orion Pirates, if I want to be able to trade with them, I can certainly send them a commercial convoy. That's no big issue. But if I want one back, they need to be a Y-dock. So in future episodes, in future streams, we'll be able to go through the discussion that I'm having with the GM about whether that is or is not possible. How can I facilitate the success of my Orion Pirates to be able to help me? Is that something I can even do? I don't know. We'll have to find that out together as we go forward. In case you're interested in something like that and seeing how I can leverage pirates for benefit in the game, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give us a thumbs up, and follow along as we're working this out with the GM and the Orion Pirates. So something exciting to think about. Lastly, you'll notice that what I've done here is I've broken up, instead of having random ships floating around, I've broken them up into task groups. Why is that? First of all, it just makes it easier to manage them around on the map. These fleet boxes, you'll notice Joint Task Force Alpha, Bravo, I think it's actually Beta, Joint Task Force Beta, and Home Fleet. So the 3 of those are just a combination of ships that I have to be able to facilitate further exploration and sort of backup and reinforcement of things that you encounter. For example, randomly coming across Orion Pirates, there's a little bit of an exchange that has to go on there to make that happen. Speaking of which, let me share with you the exchange that happened with me and the first encounter of Orion Pirates. Let me just pull that up. So what's exciting about this is, of course, when you come across an Orion, or when you come across something like that, like an Orion Pirate that you'll discover, you have basically 2 options. You can attack, which you can certainly do, but depending on the ship that you have, that may or may not work out in your favor. For example, if you have a large enough task group, then great. If you don't, it's not going to work out so well for you. Sorry, I'm just looking for the email with the information on the encounter. See, I should be well organized and have this stuff already ready for you, but you know, it is exciting. It's live. That's what the big exciting thing is about going live. Okay, so here's the sequence of events that occurred. So I went into the Hex, and I was going into the Hex with a large exploration freighter. So it's just an exploration freighter. There's nothing with it. I went into that Hex, and I found a YBS and a W-era destroyer. So destroyer and YBS, which basically means they have firepower. I don't, and they can wipe me out without an issue. So how it presents to me is I get an email from the GM that says, displays of forces, Klingon YFEL, Orion YBS WDD. What are your orders? So what can I do? I could try and retreat. However, because a freighter is a slow-moving as opposed to the D3E, which is a fast-moving ship, meaning that the D3E can move as many as 3 hexes, the YFEL only moves 1 hex at a time, or 1 hex per turn. So it's slow. And so because it's slow, it can't retreat very well. And when it chooses to retreat, something like a WDD can catch it easily and blow it out of the sky. So this was the interaction. The static of the subspace broadband was broken by the 3-tonal signal of an emergency broadcast. Mayday, mayday, mayday. This is exploration vessel Bloodhound. We are under attack from pirate vessels and require assistance. After the first cycle of the mayday signal was about to repeat, an armored hand reached over the communicator's shoulder and terminated the signal. The communicator looked up in surprise, stuttering in protest. The serenity of the armored figure's voice calmed the bridge crew as he spoke. Now that we have put on a sufficient show, let us begin in earnest. Open a channel to the Orion base station. A channel open, my lord. Orion station. This is the Klingon survey freighter Bloodhound. We request permission to come aboard and discuss opportunities for mutual profit. In a sign of good faith, I offer a gift of a barrel of Klingon blood wine. I'm sure it will serve to ease the negotiations and allow us to reach a beneficial accord. I believe the Klingon security forces responding to our mayday will be more likely to stay any hostile response if they have successfully negotiated a mutually beneficial deal by the time of their arrival. I suppose, as opposed to finding the wreckage of a destroyed freighter within weapons range of your station. Initiate self-destruct sequence set for 5 minutes. Computer voice sounds 4 minutes, 59 seconds, 58, 57, 56. I await your response. So, after a long pause, the Orion station, there is a long pause after the broadcast to the Orion station, broken only by the insistent beeping of the scanner panel detecting a weapons lock on Bloodhound. Bloodhound, this is Korvac's speakeasy. Wine and profit are the only languages we speak here. Your carcass would profit us little, so let us discuss how we may benefit each other. Oh, and don't forget that barrel of blood wine. The lock indicator ceases its desperate bleating, and the comms panel sends over your approach vector for docking. Request transporter coordinates and bring 3 barrels to the transporter room. 1 minute. 59, 58, 57. Computer, cancel self-destruct order. Authorization Alpha 3 Tango Tango Zulu 1. Authorization accepted. Self-destruct canceled. As the blast door closed behind the armored figure, the bridge crew exchanged bewildered glances before resuming their duties. After a few too many mugs of wine, Korvac and his new Klingon friend slurs to his new Klingon friend. So, what can Korvac and his disreputable band of miscreants do for the mighty Klingon Empire? We have a stealthy CR that might be able to smuggle a knick-knack or two past customs at one of your far-flung colonies. Or perhaps you have other uses for a ship that provides plausible deniability. He grins as he pours himself another mug. The Klingon smiled broadly as he took another swig of the thick crimson elixir. Whether an accustomed tolerance or the magic of generations of gene cult perfecting, the armored Klingon's metabolism seemed to shrug off the highly alcoholic cocktail. Korvac, my brother in this barrel, he said as he slapped the side of the second keg. I am pleased to have made a friend and potential ally in the dangers of the deep dark. For the time being, I believe your eyes and ears are of the greatest value to the Empire. Any news you can share of strangers you have met or stories that you have heard from traders of other civilizations or even lost settlements would be of great value. I'm sure a commission would be reasonable for any settlements, colonies, or resources that could be added to our galactic domestic product. Once we have identified some of these neighboring civilizations, a task group of capable, plausible deniability would be very useful. But we can explore that once we've found someone to plausibly deny with, eh? Nudging his inebriated friend. In the meantime, why don't we set up some steady convoys of blood wine for you? Question mark. So that's what that looks like. What do you think? Let's take a second and run or head over to the chat and see what our folks have to say in the chat. Okay, here we go. So Jim warming up his fusion beams as always. Paul waving a hello. Daniel saying, here we go. Of course, Jim is piping off his religious idolatry, calling everyone a heretic. The divine will swamp all non-believers. Oh, my goodness. Frenemies, Daniel asks. 2 SRs and 2 FELs, question mark, Jim's asking. So he was asking, of course, that about the typo that I was talking about. So now he says, aha, explanation, very good. And so Daniel says, oops, I mathed wrong. For all those who are wondering, Daniel is our game master. So it was just like I say, it was just a typo there. Chuck says, typical Klingon. You captured Korvac's cheesy demeanor perfectly. Lovely, lovely, lovely. Well, I mean, despite being, I don't know whether it's lactose intolerant or just a fan of all things wine. One of these ways, I'll be able to get it down. So with that said, that's the reveal up to turn 20. We talked about our problems with pirates. Before I get into the Omicron Initiative, what do you think about this background? I've kind of changed up the lighting a little bit. As opposed to the bright white in the back, I splashed it with a little red, considering our war news in the sense of the hostilities we've unleashed on local colonies. And of course, the red and green motif is very Klingon-esque in so many ways. You let me know what you think in the comments. Feel free to let me know whether it's something you like with a thumbs up, or if you don't, then let me know in the comments. What color combination would you prefer? Would it be more of sort of green and yellow, or Federation blue, or what is it that sort of catches your eye? And we can think about doing that for the next live stream. Let's get into the Omicron Initiative. So before I get into that, let me just take a second to acknowledge that in the news, the Omicron variant of the COVID-19 vaccine, the COVID-19 pandemic has been identified and it's in the news, and so that's why it's sort of top of mind. However, in this game, as I've mentioned before, there is the Alpha Legion inspiration for how we're doing the Klingon Empire. So in that mythology, the inspiration mythology, that is, you have these 2 twin Primarchs from the Warhammer 40k universe. And one of them is called Alfarius, and the other one's called Omicron. So you have Omicron and Alfarius. And so, sorry, not Omicron, Omegon and Alfarius, my goodness. And so these two are basically these twins, one soul, 2 bodies. And so in this iteration of the game, the idea is obviously inspired by, but not a complete copy of. And so instead of Alfarius, we're just talking about the Alpha being the leader, the figurehead, this sort of hard to identify but universally recognized leader of the people, and that there are multiple individuals who can take on this role, this mantle, and lead from the front. But within the backstory that we shared with you about the Klingon Empire, there were multiple individuals that came from that initial gene-cultured embryo. And so in that vein, instead of being a straight copy, so instead of saying Omegon, we're going to talk about Omicron. So the Omicron Initiative. What is it? Well, it would be far too easy for me to just explain to you what it is, to let you know exactly what I'm planning. But seeing as the player population is in the chat right now, I don't think that necessarily really serves the story or brings you the intrigue. Suffice it to say that the Omicron Initiative is a different tangent, is a different, for example, up to now we've seen the alpha methodology. We have dominated all of our neighbors in the sense that we have, from the Klingon perspective, we have deployed military forces, conquered those territories, and away we go. Based on the current environment, what is the Omicron Initiative? Suffice it to say that it is an alternative strategy to the current strategy being employed from the alpha perspective. The Omicron Initiative is one that is equally as effective, but juxtaposing in its approach. The Alpha Initiative is overt. It is energetic. It is dominating. The Omicron Initiative is subvert. It is not dominating, but highly influencing, and leads to tangible results. So what is it? Well, I'm not going to go into the exact mechanics of what it is, because again, I have to keep something behind the veil. But suffice it to say that it is an alternative approach to exercising influence and accomplishing goals within this game. This Federation and Empire, and the game that we're playing as Star Trek New Worlds, is very literally a war game. 4X, you explore the territory, expand your borders, exploit the resources you find, and exterminate the enemies that you come across. We have very clearly done that in the Alpha Initiative. The Omicron Initiative will be a more subtle approach. It will be a more sophisticated approach. It is now the time in which to set the groundwork, plant the seeds, and build the foundations of what will come in future turns. What exactly is that foundation that I'm building? What exactly are those seeds that I'm planting? Suffice it to say, I'm going to keep that close to the vest or close to the chest. I'm going to not exactly reveal the nuts and bolts of what I'm doing when it comes to the Omicron Initiative. However, I want you as the audience to look out at what happens over the next couple of turns. Next week, what are you going to see that happens on the map, and how do you think that that is not the Alpha Initiative? Like we said, the Alpha Initiative is overt. It's energetic. It's aggressive. It's hostile. That's the Alpha Initiative. The Omicron Initiative is going to be something different. So when you look at the map next week and you see different things happening, when you see alternative results and the non-alpha approach, what do you think is happening? Is it the Omicron Initiative? And if it is, what does that mean? I want you to check out the next live stream next week and tell me what you think the Omicron Initiative is. Suffice it to say that I am going to keep this initiative cloaked in shadow, behind the curtain. And I will let you know in subtle ways through the role-playing narrative, like I just shared with the Orion Pirates. I will share with you when we start exercising the Omicron Initiative. Suffice it to say, the Omicron Initiative has already begun. In fact, it started from the very beginning. I can tell you that there are tangible results to the Omicron Initiative. In this game so far, the Omicron Initiative has resulted in a greater economic output. It is going to allow me and the Klingon Empire greater visibility, greater gathering of intelligence, greater trade, ROI on trade. There's going to be a number of things that are going to occur in the coming turns that you will see, because, of course, I'm not revealing all the turns that I've received back as of yet. So there will be things that you will see in the turns that are coming that will be part of the Omicron Initiative. And I want you, if you accept my challenge, to call them out when you see them. When you see stuff happen, you're going to go, that is the Omicron Initiative. Well, what is it? What did you see? Call it out in the chat. Write it in the comments. Tell me what it is that you think is happening in game that is part of the Omicron Initiative. If you want to play with me, let's play. Let's see if you can see what I'm doing. I'm not being overly, too cagey about what it is I'm doing. I'm just giving you a slight veil, like a very, very easy to see through curtain that you can, quickly look through and get a sense of what's going on. But from the narrative perspective, to keep the intrigue, to keep the tension, the suspense, I have to keep something behind that curtain so that it's not completely clear to you, but you can see some of what's happening. Make sense? I hope so. Let's take a quick look at the chat again and take a look at what we got going on. Just to note, we're already 40 minutes into this live stream, so thank you so much for staying with us and keeping with us. I can see here that Jim saying, all initiatives are brought forth by the will of the divine. To deny this truth is heresy against the gods. So here, great point, sort of, that Jim is making. The role-playing aspect of this game is where we get a lot of the fun out of it. I'm sharing with you some of the role-playing stuff that's occurring between me and the GM in the context of the little bubble in which I exist, because at this point in the early stage of the game, we all are just in these little bubbles. Once we start encountering each other as the other players, then we're really going to start to see how the role-playing evolves. And we're going to be able to see sort of the personalities start to flex, the egos get bruised, so to speak, and tensions rise, conflicts erupt, or perhaps alliances be forged. We shall see as we go forward, but we won't be able to tell that until we start bumping into each other. What is going to influence that? Well, it's going to be the personalities and also the characters that are being played in this game. Jim is playing this religious fanatical theocracy. How fanatical, we shall see. However, would you, as an audience, like to hear and see an interview with Jim to talk about his faction? My intention right now is to be able to give you a sort of a brief, maybe we'll call it a 5 to 10 minute interview where the players can talk about their various factions, the personalities that are involved, and so on. The top 3 on my list right now are the Hydrons, and the Hydrons being this religious faction. Chuck and his Lyrans, because they're sort of this aggressive tribal-like persona. And then one of our newest players is playing a very interesting twist on the Carnivons, which is the sort of a small C communist slash Big Brother 1984 kind of greater good communal pack-like mentality, playing into the social structure of canines, and then but putting a twist on it, so being like again this sort of socialist greater good thing. So it'll be really interesting to be able to talk to those players, have a brief interview with them, that they can share with us the nuances or the motivations behind their characters, fully understanding that those characters, those motivations, everything can grow and evolve in the game. As an example, in previous games, we've had certain personality types be represented by, let's say, monarchs or individual characters within the story of the game. And then in the context of a monarchy, the monarch gets dethroned or assassinated or dies. And as a result, there's a tumultuous sort of civil war or conflict, political conflict that occurs within that faction to see who rises to the top. How much of it is driven by a player's preference or just random rules and figuring out how that's going to evolve, that is completely up to the player and the GM and how they want to play that. But it allows us as an audience to watch and see what's going on, sort of the intrigue, the suspense, the entertainment of that narrative to see how it goes forward. And how does it sort of influence the interactions with all the other players on the map. Geopolitics is really sort of where this game flushes out. And I got to say, when I think of other games that you play, whether it's on a tabletop or in person, virtually like this, the games that really sort of make it for me, or the ones that I personally get the most enjoyment out of, are games like, and I love this game, Game of Thrones, the board game. Game of Thrones, the board game, is very much a sort of a Risk-esque kind of game. You have armies and you're conquering territory, but at the end of the day, that's not the exciting part of the game. It's the table talk. It's the promises not to attack another opponent and then stabbing them in the back. It's the exact political intrigue that we saw and enjoyed sort of in the Game of Thrones television series, but you play it out on on the board game and in person. I love it. It's so good. Just like when you're playing, let's say, a game of poker, like a card game, and you're sort of trying to read the suspense of the other players. I mean, obviously, the sort of professional games have people being super, stoic and not conveying any information, or trying not to convey any information about what their cards have, and so on. But there's that suspense that builds up about the stakes have risen, or you can tell what the cards are, and what the chances of victory are for one player or another. And especially if we as the viewer can see both sides, the anticipation, the question mark about what is that player going to do in this fantastic situation where they might have the winning hand but choose not to call a bluff, for example. Things like that. Those kinds of social dynamics, the intrigue is really what I personally, and I hope you also enjoy in a game like this. One of the common metaphors, and I'll finish with this, one of the common metaphors is World War I. So for those of you who aren't history buffs, World War I was really different on how it got started than World War II. Arguably, World War II was maybe an echo of World War I, but World War I started off in a really interesting way. You have these sort of legacy kingdoms or states in Europe that were sort of ego-driven, populated by powerful personalities and sort of social nationalistic identities about who and what they were and the role that they had in the greater European or global, at that point, context. And because they were all sort of shuffling and competing against each other, and it was a very competitive environment, there was this sort of shuffling of the chairs to see how you could get an advantage on your opponent or your neighbors or so on. And they were so relatively equally powered. I mean, there were obviously some differences, but if no one faction was so dominant that it could just overpower everybody else. That didn't come until, of course, World War II. But the political intrigue that occurred to spark off World War I with the interplay, literally like one state after another backing each other and being sort of drawn into a conflict because of their support for sort of the losing side in a situation, without realizing that it was the losing side, is what sort of made that maelstrom of total war occur. And that was sort of what launched off World War I. But the intrigue of how that happened, and sort of if you ever read the history of the the Archduke being assassinated, and the sort of the dominoes that started to fall that led to the war, the Great War, that was very interesting to see how that turned out. And so here in this game, once we start all bumping into each other, you're going to have something very similar. You're going to have this dynamic of players or factions bumping up against each other, being neighbors to one another, and having an ability to influence well beyond their borders, impact outcomes well beyond their actual neighbors. And with some of the dynamic things that we have in this game, such as wormholes and some sort of dynamic topography or geography when it comes to the space, it's really going to open up some exciting opportunities when it comes to the later or the middle stages of this game. We're still in the early stages right now. We haven't bumped into anybody just yet, but once we do, things are going to get exciting. So what do you think? Are you looking forward to that political intrigue? Are you not interested at all in any of that sort of hot air that I just spouted? Do you not enjoy things like Days of Our Lives drama? I mean, I can understand if that's the case. You just want to see the war. You just want to see the bit by bit, the grind, the tactical deployment of ships and forces, and how the Klingon Empire is obviously going to dominate this game and kill everybody else. I understand you want to see that, and I want to bring you what you want to see. But you let me know. Do you like, in the comments, do you like the political intrigue? Do you like the story? Do you like the dynamic interaction between these sort of colorful factions? Or do you just want to see total war? Let me know in the comments below, and I will give you what it is that you're looking for. Before we get going here, I just want to have one last comment or run into the comments because I saw a lot of stuff coming down the pipe here. Let's see here. Jim is saying the light of the divine shines through thin veils, obviously making my reference to my my subterfuge there. Chuck is saying, bah, as usual, Klingons think they are better than all others. That's because we are. We will show them the folly of their outlook. We will demand and get reparations for those Lyrans they have killed and subjugated. One thing to make mental note of, it's so fun. Like as players, we metagame all the time. But one of the things that happened in previous games is that your attitudes or the things that you did against minor factions, like non-player characters, would echo and influence other minor factions in the game. In this iteration, in the absence of that, there won't be any influence. Let me rephrase that. There will be no memory, no echo, no influence of previous or past behaviors against other minor factions, unless those minor factions have visibility of what you're doing when you're doing it. For example, I just took out the Lyrans and the Carnivons in those two colonies. So if I discovered another Carnivon or Lyran before I had finished taking them out, then that Lyran or Carnivon faction would have seen me demolish those two colonies and might have been somewhat, it would have influenced my interaction with them. So, but because, as you saw, they were dominated and integrated into the Klingon Empire without there being another minor faction discovered during the time of conflict, there is no influence at that point. So will the player can do whatever the player wants, but something to think about when it comes to sort of how that sort of influence things. We'll see. We'll see what kind of narrative motivation Chuck comes up with to be able to like come after the Klingon Empire. And of course, bring it on. So we will demand and get reparations for those Lyrans they have killed and subjugated. I think I'm going to tell a little story about that, about what happened with the Lyrans and the Carnivons. We'll talk about that in a future episode. It'll be sort of part of what happens behind the veil. So Jim says the Carnivons is also an Aussie, and therefore this game is now truly global. Yeah, that's a comment. So with our 10 players that we now have players from literally across the globe. So excited to share that with you. We have one player who is in Australia. Of course, we have a number of folks in North America, both in the US and Canada. We have folks in the UK. So if you think about the UK and Australia, quite literally on opposite ends, polar opposite ends of the world. Very, very interesting. So really cool to have that sort of evolve that way. Bill saying, hi, Smitty, the Gornish Harmonic Choir shall bring harmony to the universe with fluffy space dragons. Well, of course, I mean, Puff the Magic Dragon, if that's your bag, baby, whatever makes you happy. Jim says, it'll be on like Donkey Kong, he says. Chuck says, great book on the start of World War I, Sleepwalkers by Christopher Clark. So we're talking about the sort of the intrigue and political dynamic, the sort of Days of Our Lives drama that goes along with the beginning of World War I. Chuck's making a recommendation of this book by Christopher Clark called Sleepwalkers. So I haven't checked it out. I'll go check it out. We'll see how that goes. Smitty's saying Fluffy loves methane worlds plus after the COP 1000, obviously making reference to recent events, all methane worlds need to be eliminated due to the adverse universal climate change. I couldn't agree more. I mean, those hydrants, they're just warming up the universe. We want a heat death to the universe, not a heating up, right? Or we want to at least keep it somewhere in the middle. Chuck says, Dreadnought by Robert Massey, maybe another book that you want to check out when it comes to World War I. Dreadnoughts, of course, being the battleship of choice, so to speak, at the turn of the century, and what governed or sort of was the hallmark of Royal Navy dominance across the seas. So we shall see how all that goes, but some reading recommendations if that's what you like to do. And, of course, exciting stuff that is coming forth in this game as we move forward. Tune in next week to see where the Klingon Empire will pop up next on this sort of random population map. Because, of course, I'm not really showing you where I am in the world because then everyone would come straight at me. Too exciting. But we'll see where else we pop up and what that sort of tells you about the exciting things that are happening in the map. It'll be really interesting to see, actually, in a future episode when we start encountering some other players, but the map you see on the screen isn't really where I am, and whether those players can do the sort of can see the picture that I'm showing on the map and relate it to what they're seeing on their map and see if it matches up. Because maybe I'm not going to be the first one you bump into. Maybe it'll be somebody else. Most likely it'll be somebody else. We have 10 players. I am merely one of them. So chances are you're going to bump into somebody else in this game, and we'll see how that goes. So very exciting. So sort of suspense-filled to see what comes next in the turns to come. But with that said, really appreciate you guys joining us here today on Saturday. It's coming up on an hour, so I want to make sure that you get to enjoy your weekend, have a good time. For those of you in the United States, hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I mistakenly thought that Thanksgiving weekend was last weekend for you folks, because of course I'm up here in the Great White North of Canada. So again, for those of you in the United States, have a wonderful Thanksgiving Day weekend. Have a great time. Enjoy that turkey and whatever other celebrations that you're taking part in. Stay safe, and I will see you in the next episode.